Okay, this is chapter 3, part 5. I've broken this chapter into two parts because there's so much packed in here. I thought that I needed to spread it out a little bit over 2 weeks. So now we're doing the second half. If you recall, and maybe it's been a while since you watched the last video segment, but we were talking about personality disorders, getting into just the introductory ideas surrounding these personality disorders. And the last point we made was that people who research these personality disorders tend to focus on the biological uh, origins of these disorders. They tend to look at genes as being an important source of this, and brain function, brain development, and brain function. So that's just that's not to say that they don't look at other factors, but there is a lot of focus on um, the sort of stable, answering the question, why is it that these traits last, throughout one's lifetime over a long period of time, and that they tend to manifest themselves in different situations? How is it that the people are acting the same all the time? Well, it comes from the fact that the brain has a stable structure and it tends to function in the same way all the time, going all the way back to even childhood. And so you see the stability because of the stable nature of brain functioning. So let's get into some of the primary traits for and the different types of personality disorders. The number one thing we talk about here is paranoid. What we mean by that is a pervasive distrust and suspicion of others. And this certainly contributes to violence. Because if in your interactions with other people, you're constantly on your guard thinking that the other person is out to get you, is out to exploit you, is manipulating you, is lying to you, well, this tends to make interactions negative, hostile, and raises the risk of violence. Same thing for suspiciousness. If you assume the worst of other people, it tends to turn interactions negative and can start an argument that in the beginning is verbal and then escalates to something physically violent. Or it doesn't even have to be that with serial killers. It doesn't have to be that based that much on argument. It can just be having these disturbed thoughts, thinking the worst about other people. Number two, schizoid. What they mean by schizoid is a detachment from relationships, aloofness, and limited expression of emotion. So here they're sort of talking about this lack of social connection with other people. So detached from relationships. So someone who's standoffish, who's sort of a lone wolf, who doesn't have many friends or close family relationships, maybe doesn't have romantic kinds of relationships, not married potentially, and also maybe someone who may be sort of flat in their expression of emotions, sort of dead in that emotionally. And we certainly see with these serial killers a lot of times this sort of flatness, this coldness, this lack of reactivity and sensitivity to other people, and potentially a lack of emotions, normal, natural emotions. That's one manifestation you can see as sort of a robotic quality or coldness. Schizotypical number three, social and interpersonal deficits and eccentric behaviors that inhibit close relationships. So it sounds somewhat similar to schizoid. And I'll make sure and not test you on this in a way that would trip you up on the difference between schizoid and schizotypical, because we're talking about a similar sort of thing, but with an emphasis here on eccentric, odd behaviors that get in the way of being able to form friendships or good relationships, good quality relationships with other people. So it's some real deficits in your ability to get along with others, to interact positively and in a normal kind of way. So think eccentricity, think odd, think of socially difficult. Number four, antisocial, is this is extreme disregard and violation of the rights of others. Um, And so here we're talking about antisocial is a word we usually use in the context of crime or, violation of other people's rights, victimizing other people. So, we're talking about that you really don't respect the rights of others. You don't respect their feelings. You see them as people that can be exploited, take advantage of, you just disregard. You don't care about the feelings or rights of others. So it's a real, um, you know, um, absence of feeling for other people. Now it looks like I might have skipped a number for this next one, borderline, but bear with me on that. What they mean by borderline personality disorder is instability in interpersonal relationships and self-image and extreme impulsivity. So you see someone who's borderline tends to have very unstable relationships. They're very manipulative, very emotional, very hot and cold, uh, very unstable, just unpredictable and really hard to live with because of this, shifting and unpredictability and extreme impulsivity, meaning that you just jump into things. In 1 second you're this way, and the next second you're completely opposite, and it's very emotional, and it's emotionally a roller coaster with these people, and there's just a lot of manipulation, and very difficult to live or have interpersonal relationships with people who suffer from borderline personality disorder. And you certainly do see that tendency in some uh, serial killers. Number 5, histrionic. This is grandiosity, egocentric, excessive emotionality, and attention seeking. So this is someone who's very emotional. Histrionic, in the word in itself, means just like hysterical, just really excessively emotional. Grandiosity blows everything up into a big drama, a big deal. Egocentric, meaning selfish and it's all about me. And also likes attention, and so takes actions and behaves in a way to get attention from other people. Histrionic. So definitely there, histrionic is the word itself is really focusing on this extreme emotionality. Um, Narcissistic is self-absorbed, grandiosity, need for praise, lack of empathy. So again, narcissistic in and of itself, that word means it's all about me, self-love, but it's self-absorbed. It's like the rules don't apply to me. I'm better than everybody else. I'm more important than everybody else. This grandiose sense of self, this constant need for praise and being uplifted and made to feel special. And also, that you're so much into yourself and so focused on yourself that you're not really able to empathize, to be able to put yourself in the shoes of other people. And so that's a real disconnect there and can contribute to crime where all you can see is your own needs and your own desires, and the desires of other people. You can't see them, you can't recognize them, you can't feel them because you lack empathy. The world is so much about you. You're so much at the center. You just aren't able to take the position of other people and see where they're coming from. Number 7, avoidant. This is someone with relationship problems, social inhibition, not comfortable with people, withdrawn, lone wolf, feelings of inferiority, so self-esteem problems, hypersensitive to criticism, so not able to handle interactions or relationships with other people because of fear of being judged or being criticized or being disapproved of, feelings of inferiority. I'm not good enough. I'm worried that if I, have relationships with people, they'll see how terrible I am. And so the best thing to do is just avoid people, just withdraw and, be the lone wolf, be on your own, uh, the loner, that kind of thing. So that's what they're getting at with avoidant. Dependent is relationship problems, needs to be cared for, fear of abandonment, submissive and clinging. So this is somebody who's not comfortable by themselves. They're not independent and healthy to be able to live their lives on their own when, if you need to, if there's times in your life where you're on your own. These folks can't handle that. They've cling to people. They're so needy and they're desperate to hold on to somebody, afraid of being abandoned, constant need of being cared for, and submissive too, where they want to be cared for, but they want to be, they don't want to be the boss. They want to be more the servant, more of the be told what to do and directed, because maybe they can't direct their own lives, take charge of their own lives. Obsessive compulsive, this is a preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, mental and interpersonal control. This type of person's inflexible and inefficient with their behavior. So this is someone who's kind of fixated with being neat, orderly, and they may be obsessive about it, where, someone with these sorts of tendencies is someone who will wash their hands constantly throughout the day, or, check the stove before they leave 5 times because they're so freaked out and worried about having left the stove on and that the house is going to burn down or something like that. So they have these repetitive thoughts and behaviors where and everything has to be in its place. If things are out of place, that it makes you uncomfortable, and you're preoccupied with getting things back into an orderly condition. So it's just a unhealthy relationship with neatness, orderliness, to the point where, and being perfect, everything being perfect to the point where it becomes a disorder, and it becomes the person isn't even really orderly and efficient and doesn't get things done because it becomes dysfunctional. It becomes out of control. But you can see there is an element of control there, that they want to control things because they want everything to be just so, right? Now you can see it's a long list, and I won't test you too heavily on this, expect you know every little thing. But you can see how a lot of these are sort of related to each other, that there's overlaps here, and you can see, tendencies, similarities from one personality disorder trait to the next. That's one thing to keep in mind with this. Personality disorders are resistant to change. As I said before, the researchers tend to focus a lot on the biological roots of these disorders, and part of that is to look at the genetic sources of it. So I've got here this term heritability. What do I mean by that? Well, when they do genetic research, when they do twin studies or other sorts of family studies to be able to tease out what's the role that genes are playing in a disorder, they're able to calculate, using the data, able to calculate how much of the disorder is influenced by the particular genetic makeup of the individual. So each of us has a completely unique set of genes. Each human has roughly about 20,000 genes that all work together what they do is they synthesize proteins, many different types of proteins that are all used to build cells, to run cells, to maintain cells. And where it's most important for personality is brain cells, neurons in the brain. Well, those all get made, and parts of those neurons get made and get directed by genes. So genes are in charge of the kind of construction and maintenance of these cells, brain cells, and of course all the cells in your body. And so there's about 20,000 of them, and each one of us has a unique combination. No two people, unless you're identical twins, no two people have the exact same set of genes. There's a lot of differences. Even family members, even you differ from your parents. You share a lot of the genes with your parents, but not 100%. So you're going to get some from mom, you're going to get some from dad, about 50% from each. And it's going to be sort of a random shuffling of kind of, to speak really simply about this, it's kind of like a random shuffle of genes. There's a lot of chance involved. So that makes each child of two parents different. There's no two children are going to be the same, even though they have the same parents, unless you're identical twins. Those are the only humans who have the exact same genes. So anyway, the bottom line is that they use these studies to estimate how much these 20,000 genes are influencing a personality disorder. And you can see the various numbers here. This heritability number ranges from 0, where genes would make any difference, up to 1.00, or 100%, which means that 100% of the trait was due to genes. And basically, you could just about say no trait is 100% genetic in origin. But what you can see from these numbers here is these various types of personality disorders really have high heritabilities. 79.79 for narcissistic personality disorder, which is 0.79 is the same thing as 79%. So what that heritability means is that according to the studies that they're citing here, that 79% of the narcissistic personality disorder is caused by the particular genes that individuals have. And it's all genes. It's not 1 or 2 or 3. It's like counting all of them, which is a lot, 20,000. So one thing to keep in mind is individual genes have very little influence on what you're like. A single gene just doesn't make much difference usually. But they make a lot of difference when you add them all up, when there's 20,000 of them. Even though each gene only makes a tiny, tiny little contribution, add them all up, and then it makes a big contribution on these traits. So 79% for narcissistic personality disorder, 78% for obsessive compulsive disorder, 69% for borderline personality disorder, 67% for histrionic personality disorder, 61% for schizotypal typal personality disorder, 57% for dependent personality disorder, 29%. So we kind of start out with the big ones, and now we're dropping down to where the genetic influence is less, is smaller. 29% for schizoid, 28% for paranoid, 28% for avoidant. So, but even with these on the low end here, 28%, that's still significant. That's still a significant part of the story. So what these studies of various types of genetic studies conclude is that the genetic contribution to these disorders is significant. And so it's going to be one factor. It's likely to be one factor to explain, well, where do these serial killers pick this up from? Well, the part of the story, according to this research, is that they're likely to pick up a unique combination of genes. Since we're each unique, they just happen to have the bad luck of getting a collection, a combination of genes, which is unhealthy, which produces somebody with bad tendencies. With these here, we're talking about personality disorders that contribute to violence and criminality. So it's not the whole story, but it's one part of the story, and so it's a theme that I'll emphasize this semester. That that if you're going to explain these strange, odd, unusual, severe types of criminality that you see with serial killers, that you kind of have to take a multi-factor approach. It's not just one thing. It's not just that they had a terrible home life when they were growing up that caused them to be disturbed and violent. That it's probably a combination, maybe quite a few factors that all work together, and unfortunately, all in a bad direction, making a person severely violent. So the approach, and again, you should walk away from this course with whatever you find compelling, and the things you don't find compelling, then don't take those ideas with you. My goal is to just present a full menu of factors that could potentially explain the development of this severe violent behavior. Antisocial personality disorder is a common disorder among violent offenders. If you go look in a typical prison, you're going to have a significant percentage, not all, but a significant percentage of inmates are going to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. It includes a history of antisocial behavior. Again, that's kind of basically means criminality, where you're mistreating and abusing and exploiting other individuals and showing a really erratic, impulsive, disorganized lifestyle yourself, beginning no later than 15 for males and for females anytime during the teens. So this disorder tends to appear among children, but it doesn't get called antisocial personality disorder when you're a child. They're more likely to call it conduct disorder, a focus on serious misbehaviors, conduct problems when you're a kid. But those kids who have conduct problems and get a conduct disorder diagnosis, they're at high risk of developing antisocial personality disorder as older teens or adults. Behaviors include incorrigibility, which means that's just a fancy word saying that you're really badly behaved, say in school, at home, in different domains, in different places, and that you just don't respond to correction, to being taught to behave better, to punishments, to teachers working with you, parents working with you. All of these things that grown-ups do to try to straighten out your behavior just doesn't work. That's what they mean by incorrigibility. So you also see among these kids, teenagers, and also grown-ups, theft, maybe obsessive, frequent theft, small things and large, fighting, violence, deceitfulness, lying, habitual lying when there's no reason to even lie, just like obsessive, habitual really is the word to use there, habitual liar. Excessive drug, alcohol use, so you do see often addiction with these people, or at least abusive behavior with drugs and alcohol. Very reckless kind of behavior. These are risk takers. They'll do dangerous things. An example of recklessness might be something like driving really crazy, or going out and target shooting with a gun and while you're drunk, that kind of thing. That's when we say reckless, it means it doesn't always necessarily have to be illegal, but it just shows a disregard for safety and high risk kinds of behavior. Impulsivity, again, similar to recklessness, doing extreme things without thinking beforehand, dangerous things, criminal things, uh, things that can get you some serious trouble, and you just don't think about how you're going to get in trouble when you do them. And by aggressive behavior, we mean any behavior that's intended to hurt other people, whether it be physical aggression, which is basically, assault, physical attacks, or aggressive behavior can also just be a nasty, verbal abuse of other people. Verbal aggression is just trying to hurt other people with your words. Or it could be indirect aggression where you hurt somebody behind their back. It could be something like, keying somebody's car while they're doing damage to their property when they're not around, or just vicious gossiping, backbiting, saying nasty things about people behind their backs to hurt their reputations, to hurt them in some form. But the common denominator here is this behaviors where you're trying to hurt somebody else in some way. As adults, they have, number one, a difficult time with relationships. So this is a common thing we see with a lot of these patterns, that they don't tend to make very good friends. They don't tend to make good boyfriends, girlfriends, sons, daughters, parents, co-workers, etc. Number two, poor work habits. So I just mentioned that they tend to be unreliable workers. They get fired a lot. Might last for a couple of weeks on the job, but they have really spotty, unreliable records because they just have a hard time making it work on time and being a good, responsible, diligent employee. So just not very responsible, reliable people. Number three, so problems with irresponsibility, people you can't rely on, people who just don't do what they say they're going to do in very obvious kind of strong ways. Hostile attitudes, so these we mentioned hostility and suspicion before. These people tend to have a tendency towards hostility towards other people. They don't trust other people. They don't have goodwill towards other people. They tend to be maybe nasty, difficult people. Number five is a lack of insight about their problems and plans. Yeah, so they're not good at seeing their own weaknesses. They always blame everything on everybody else. Everything, all the bad stuff they do is always somebody else's fault. They're not able to see how they cause bad things to happen and how they're responsible for their own behaviors and accountable for their own behaviors. So there's a constant blaming of others, even though you're doing all sorts of horrible things. So this is again, what are we talking about here? These are the symptoms of what you see that's likely to get this diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Let's stop there. We'll continue on in the next part.